Hi, and welcome once again to the program that raises questions. Cleverly enough, that's why we call it Raising Questions. We have a couple of different kinds of questions that have been floating in from all over the universe, it seems like today, and we have a special guest, no one less than Dr. Henry Kissinger. He'll be with us, and we're going to plunge right away into some questions concerning global politics, as a matter of fact. We have questions, as I say, from all over the place, and one of those questions is Trump doing the right thing meeting with Mr. Kim of Korea? Well, it seems like he is, actually. There's a real big point to be made about this. For a long time, Germany was divided. Germany was divided into West Germany and East Germany beginning at the end of the war. Well, more officially in 1949. And it took almost a human lifetime to get them back together again. Now they are back together, and they're just plain old Germany. How did that happen? Well, it didn't come about through war or nuclear contests of any kind, but both sides really did hate each other, the East and the West. And on each side, the East side and the West side, there was a mighty empire rooting for its own section of the country, Russia and the United States. It was a bad scene all around. Well, how did we get the Germans to reunite? What happened was, of course, through Mr. Gorbachev, the Russians decided, look, this is a joke. We don't need this anymore. We don't need a divided Germany anymore. And the Americans, of course, welcomed that, and everybody relaxed, and East and West Germany got back together because for decades, they had been working on closer business relationships and negotiating through diplomacy. Of course, each side also had a very strong military to keep things more or less cool. Even though it was called the Cold War, things did cool off. That's an odd phrase. Things cooled off, and that ended the Cold War. Well, right now, we're hoping that things cool off in North and South Korea. It may not be as easy as it was in West Germany, of course, but it looks like Mr. Trump is at the moment succeeding. He is trying to do apparently the two things that helped in Germany, and that is respect the military powers that are able to determine what goes on if things get really hot. Now that sounds a little fancy. The point is that the North Koreans have to respect American power. We have to respect North Koreans' nuclear capability, North Korea's, and we also have to respect the mysterious power of China. China wants, I would say, wants a nice, peaceful peninsula, the North and South Korean peninsula. On the other hand, what they do not want is North and South Korea to get together while 28,000 American troops stay in South Korea, along with anti-ballistic missile systems that are American, stationed in South Korea. So it's a little bit dicey. On the other hand, as I keep saying, there is the model of East and West Germany, and it seems like Mr. Trump, by agreeing to meet with somebody from North Korea, is doing the right thing. And he's keeping pressure on the Koreans by trumpeting the fact that we do have a nuclear capability able to destroy North Korea. And we did that in West Germany as well. We let the Russians know if there's any trouble in Berlin or in West Germany, then the nuclear capability of the United States might come into play. So things don't look too discouraging there. We have some more questions about global politics, and that one, one of them is, what about the Iranian nuclear deal? Mr. Trump pulled out of that. Is that good or is it bad? He's getting a lot of criticism, of course, for upsetting the Iranians. On the other hand, I keep going back to this. He's also letting the world know America isn't to be toyed with. We do have a tremendous military capability. That's the bedrock, unfortunately, of the situation. And it is extremely irritating that the Iranians have, for quite a while now, been sending military people and building up military infrastructure in other places in the Middle East where you could say they don't really belong, like in Syria and so forth. So the Iranians did agree in the Iranian nuclear deal, all right, fine, we'll cool it with our nuclear weapons, but they didn't agree, apparently, on causing other kinds of trouble. So Mr. Trump said, I'm out of the deal. It's an interesting thing, too, that he didn't pull out of a treaty. The deal was not a treaty. The Iranian nuclear deal was not a treaty. The United States did not allow the U.S. Senate to take a look at the deal, partly because Mr. Trump figured probably that the Senate would say no, or at least it would be difficult to get the thing approved. And I should have said Mr. Obama, of course. President Obama did not submit the idea to the United States Senate, and as a result of that, the deal is not really properly, or was not properly, a treaty. Mr. Trump just pulled out of a deal. So it's hard to say, again, that he did something that violates the normal terms and traditions and practices and norms of international politics. There is still going to be a giant question, of course, what's going to happen? And will the pressure that he's now putting on Iran actually be able to change Iranian policies throughout the Middle East? It's a dicey situation. We have other questions also. We talked last time a little bit about the fragmentation that's going on inside of our own country. And we have a bunch of questions about that. In the first place, what are we talking about? Fragmentation. There's another word for that, and that is alienation. It's a very big issue in my view, and it's something that, in my opinion, is not getting the attention that it deserves. The United States, it seems to me, is moving towards a situation where we are no longer going to be the United States. We do see some of the controversy about that kind of thing in the controversy that surrounds Mr. Trump's policies towards illegal immigrants. Other people say undocumented immigrants and so forth. There are all kinds of terms, but the fact is, from a legal point of view, we are talking about something that goes on that is, in fact, illegal, and what are we going to do about it? That's just one aspect of the situation that is something that we can put under the umbrella term of fragmentation, and maybe we can better understand what's going to happen with certain aspects of American life if we look at it that way. Here's another question. Is there another example that we can talk about with regard to alienation and fragmentation in America? Is there something that we can look at, and I'm filing through these questions as I talk, is there something that we can look at that would make that clearer? Well, look at the last election. The last election was not really fought on questions of the economy. A new survey has shown, not proven, but at least shown, that thousands and thousands of people who moved towards Trump, who actually gave up their previous party, who switched party to vote for Trump, actually were not afraid of their economic situation getting worse or trying that hard to make it better, compared to the fear that they felt about falling down in terms of social status. A large part of the Trump vote was based on that. White men, obviously, we all know about that, often feared, or many of them feared, a fall in their social position. And the surprising thing was that so many white women voted for Trump. Hillary Clinton expecting to take that part of the electorate. Millions of white women voted for Trump, it turns out, according to this new survey, because they did not like the idea of mixing gender roles or mixing up gender roles and leaving other traditions in American life. And I think that's a really fabulous point. People hate change unless they are pretty sure that it's going to be a change for the better. And tradition and cultural roles play a big part in that. And that's something that we need to look at. One of the old traditions, to make this a little bit clearer, that we used to have in the United States was a terrible tradition called segregation. And Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice of the United States in 1954, put his finger on the problem years and years ago in 1954 in that magic case called Brown against the Board of Education that ended segregation in American schools as far as the Supreme Court was concerned. It took years and years, decades in fact, for that to happen in actual practice. But Earl Warren said in that case that segregation itself, separation itself, blacks go here, whites go there to various schools, that very fact is what produces a feeling of inferiority in people. Black kids being separated from the majority almost automatically felt inferior. That's written in the Supreme Court's findings in 1954 already. So fast forward a little bit to the Trump election, and you can understand this time among the white population that is feeling more and more separate from what it used to think was a majority. They're feeling separated from majority practices now. They're feeling separated from majority traditions, and they're starting to feel inferior. Absolutely no question then that they would vote for somebody who promised to upset the system. All right, let's go to another aspect of this fragmentation and alienation, because we're going to an important point, I think, and that is another survey. Surveys don't prove anything, but they do demonstrate things. Among 20,000 adults who were recently questioned by an insurance company, a health insurance company, there was, in other words, a survey of 20,000 adults. 43% of them, get this, said that their relationships are not meaningful. 43% of them. Lots of loneliness there. 23, make that 27% of these 20,000 people said they rarely or never feel understood. That's absolutely incredible. Is there a bunch of loneliness out there? Is there a bunch of alienation? Boy, it sure looks like it. There's a new book about Texas that has something to say about this. And that book, which is called God Save Texas, describes, among other things, the traditions of individuality in Texas. We know all about that. That speaks also to Reaganism, not that Reagan was a Texan. I think he was, though, a movie cowboy. I'm not sure. And a lot of movies, cowboy movies, bring in Texas, so we can include Reaganism in this, too. Reaganism was rampant in America under Ronald Reagan, and that meant individuality. At least that was the myth that he propagated, and it has really stuck, no question about it. The other half of life, besides trying to be an individual, is to try to connect with people. And what these questions and surveys are showing is that so far, so bad. Individualism seems to be trumping, no pun intended, the desire for, or let's say the act of completing connection in the United States. It seems like connection is losing out to individualism. And that, again, was not exactly started by Ronald Reagan, but it was certainly emphasized. And that's a very Republican idea. Now, here's the interesting thing. Individualism is more or less written into the United States Constitution. In other words, the states as individual states have a lot of rights. And it used to be that states' rights were vastly supported by segregationists and other ultra-conservative people who wanted to keep certain rights away from the black population. And so states' rights were looked upon by progressives as not a very good thing. Turns out, though, states like California are now defying the United States government, pleading for states' rights for progressive reasons. Very interesting. California, for instance, wants to have higher standards that cars have to meet with regard to pollution than the federal standards, or than the federal standards that Mr. Trump might want. So what we're seeing is, oddly enough, a move towards the fragmentation of the country, emphasis on states' rights instead of a united system, because the government in Washington that is supposed to unite us is making things unprogressive, or at least trying to. So the progressive forces are now resting on that old idea of states' rights in order to make things more progressive. Well, that makes things more progressive, but at the same time, does it, this is the big question I'm raising, does it also undermine the unity of the country? Does it undermine the idea that we are the United States? Well, we don't know. But we do know this, and believe it or not now, the following point is related to all of that stuff. Another, not a survey, but another bunch of figures that I think is relevant comes from the American Lung Association, which has pointed out recently that no less than 40%, almost half of the people in America, are now breathing, they say, heavily polluted air. And ozone, which we know is a toxic gas, levels are rising, not falling. Things are getting worse as far as air is concerned, in one major respect at least, with regard to ozone. Things are getting worse. They're not progressing towards the better, they're getting worse. Well, at this time, along comes the handy Ford Motor Company, which has just said that it's going to stop making regular cars, basically, and move on towards truck making and SUV production. Not good. Not good at all. SUVs get what? 1 mile per gallon? Actually, they get something like 23 miles per gallon. But that's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. Almost nobody needs an SUV for the reasons that you usually hear people say, boy, I need an SUV. We got to get the whole family, the whole neighborhood to that soccer game, and only an SUV can do that. Well, stand on the corner and watch all the SUVs go by. Sounds like a song. Watch the SUVs go by. Normally, I think one person, maybe two, maybe one person and a dog take up the spaces in these giant cars. We have to do something about that. That's my opinion. All right, the last thing that we have to say about that is that fragmentation is the name of the game here. Fragmentation even applies to SUV driving. Instead of thinking about the country as a whole, about the community as a whole, too many companies like Ford are urging people to be individualistic, get that giant car, that tank, and drive it down the road. It doesn't matter to them how much pollution that creates. Moving rapidly along. Is there any more bad news? Yes. What a downer idea. But one of the worst things that I've seen recently in America is this sign that says, drive like your kids live here. This has nothing to do with politics. This is about communication. Drive like your kids live here. Maybe you've seen it. It's a black sign with white lettering. That undermines everything we need to know about how to communicate. Drive like your kids live here. It should be, of course, drive as if your kids lived here. Whoever wrote that original sign needs a big lesson in how to do English. Moving rapidly along. There's another piece of bad news. Home prices. Home prices are now spiraling ever upward. The price of a home has now risen for the last 70 months in a row. And on all sorts of radio and TV shows you hear, boy, is that great. A healthy home market, a healthy housing market. That's not housing, that's not health at all. That is housing, but it's not healthy at all. What if you're looking for a place to live? Why are higher home prices always trumpeted as something wonderful? Do you ever hear anybody on radio and TV say, we have good news, gas prices are zooming ever higher? You never hear that. How come with home prices? It's a mystery. All right, is there any good news? Yes, there is some good news. Another survey shows that in the elections that have been held earlier in this year, January through April, those are primary elections basically, in elections held in this country, January through April, Republicans mentioned Hillary Clinton a lot, 13,000 times. 13,000 times was she mentioned by the Republicans. By the Democrats, she was mentioned 8 times. 8 times. This shows maybe the Democrats are learning. Don't nominate someone with the views behind Hillary Clinton. Start thinking about doing something progressive. I forgot completely about Henry Kissinger. I'm really sorry. That was totally my fault. Dr. Kissinger's a very busy man. He had to leave. Maybe next time.